The golden glow of chandeliers shimmered across the Blake Manor ballroom, casting light on diamonds, silk gowns, and the kind of luxury only the ultra-rich could afford. The air smelled of champagne, roses, and power. Everyone who mattered in the city was there that night. Politicians, business moguls, and celebrities, all celebrating the 30th birthday of billionaire heir Ethan Blake. Ethan, tall, confident, and dangerously handsome, stood at the center of it all. His designer suit was crisp, his smile charming, and his voice filled the room whenever he laughed. But beneath that confident exterior was a man growing numb from a life where everything came too easily. "I could buy anything," he once told his friend. "But I've never felt anything worth buying." The orchestra played softly in the background as waiters rushed between the guests, balancing silver trays of champagne and hors d'oeuvres. Among them was Lila Hart, a young waitress in a plain black dress. Her hair was tied back neatly, but a loose strand framed her tired yet graceful face. Lila wasn't like the others. Her movements were quiet, almost invisible. She served people who barely looked at her, but her eyes carried a depth that didn't belong to a girl from the catering staff. Those who noticed her felt something unexplainable, like she was a melody waiting to be played. As she approached Ethan's table, a guest's careless elbow caught her tray. The glasses crashed to the marble floor, sending a spray of champagne across Ethan's expensive shoes. The room went silent. Lila froze, her face flushing with embarrassment. I'm so sorry, sir." Ethan looked down at the mess, then up at her trembling hands. For a moment, everyone expected him to explode, but instead he leaned back in his chair, a mischievous smile curling on his lips. "Well," he said, his tone dripping with amusement, "that's one way to make an impression." The crowd laughed softly, easing the tension. But Ethan wasn't done. He looked at her again, really looked this time. There was something about her eyes, something hauntingly familiar. "What's your name?" he asked. "Lila," she whispered. "Lila," he repeated thoughtfully, swirling the champagne in his glass. "You look like someone who's got a story." "I just work here, sir." He tilted his head, intrigued. "You know, I like challenges. Tell you what, play the violin for me tonight, and I'll marry you." The guests gasped. Some chuckled, others exchanged curious glances. Was he serious? Lila's heart pounded. Was this a cruel joke? She wanted to disappear, but something in his tone felt like a dare. She remembered a different time, a different life, before everything fell apart. Years ago, Lila had been a rising star at the city's music academy. Her violin performances drew crowds to tears, but after her parents died in a car accident, she was left with debts, loneliness, and no family. She sold her violin, left the academy, and took up odd jobs to survive. Music became a memory, a part of her she'd buried to keep breathing. "Play the violin, and I'll marry you," Ethan repeated, his voice echoing through the hall. Something inside her stirred. "Deal," she said quietly. The laughter around the room stopped. Even Ethan looked slightly taken aback. Someone in the orchestra hesitated, then handed her a spare violin. It was old, dusty, and slightly out of tune, but real. Lila took it in her hands as if holding a piece of her soul again. She adjusted the strings gently, closed her eyes, and drew the bow across the violin. At first, the sound was shaky, rough like her trembling breath. A few guests snickered. Ethan smirked, expecting her to give up. But then, something changed. The melody began to take shape, soft, deep, and achingly beautiful. The notes carried her pain, her memories, her buried dreams. Each stroke of the bow became a confession. The music filled the vast ballroom, wrapping everyone in a haunting warmth. Conversations died. Glasses froze mid-air. Even the chandeliers seemed to hum with the rhythm of her heart. The melody rose higher, fierce and alive, then fell into a tender whisper that made the crowd lean in closer. Every note was a story. Her parents' laughter, the rain on her window as she practiced alone, the moment she sold her violin with tears in her eyes. And Ethan felt something he hadn't in years. His chest tightened. His pulse matched her rhythm. He didn't just hear her play, he felt her play. When the final note lingered in the air and faded into silence, the room stayed frozen for a heartbeat, then erupted into applause. People rose to their feet, clapping, cheering, some even crying. Lila lowered the violin slowly, her hands trembling. She looked up at Ethan, whose smirk had vanished completely. His expression was unreadable, somewhere between awe and disbelief. She stepped closer, her voice calm but steady. "Was that good enough for a marriage, Mr. Blake?" Ethan opened his mouth but found no words. For the first time in his carefully controlled life, he was speechless. All he could manage was a quiet, Who taught you to play like that?" Lila smiled faintly. "Life did." She handed the violin back, turned, and walked toward the exit. The crowd parted silently, watching her leave like a ghost who had just reminded them what beauty felt like. As the doors closed behind her, Ethan sat in stunned silence. Around him, guests buzzed with excitement, praising her performance, debating if the billionaire would actually marry her. But Ethan didn't hear them. His mind was replaying her music over and over, the sound that had broken through the walls he'd built around his heart. That night, long after everyone had gone home, he sat alone in the empty ballroom, the same violin resting beside him. He picked it up clumsily, running his fingers along its strings. He didn't know her full story. He didn't even know where she lived. But one thing was clear. Lila Hart had changed something inside him. And for the first time in his life, the man who could buy anything realized there was one thing he truly wanted. Something he couldn't buy. He wanted her. Ethan Blake didn't sleep that night. The haunting melody Lila had played still echoed in his mind, every note piercing through the thick walls of pride and privilege he had built around himself. For years, Ethan had been surrounded by wealth, glamour, and people who pretended to love him for what he had. But for the first time, someone had walked away after touching his soul, and she had done it with nothing but a violin. By morning, he made a decision. He had to find her. He used every contact he had, managers, event coordinators, even the catering company that had hired her, but no one seemed to know where she went. One of the waiters finally said she quit right after the performance. "Didn't even take her paycheck," the man said. Ethan frowned. Who walks away after something like that? Days passed. He tried to focus on work, on meetings, on the empire he'd inherited. But every time he walked into his office, the silence reminded him of her music. He couldn't eat. He couldn't think. He even started listening to classical records, hoping one might sound like her, but none came close. Then one evening, while driving aimlessly through the city, he heard something that made him hit the brakes. Through the open window of a small seaside cafe, he heard her. The soft, trembling melody of a violin drifted into the air, mingling with the sound of crashing waves. Ethan's heart raced. He parked the car and followed the sound inside. There she was. Lila sat near the window, her violin tucked beneath her chin, playing to a crowd of only a few people. Her clothes were simple, her hair loose, and her eyes closed as she played. There was no stage, no spotlight, just her and the music. Ethan stood there silently until she finished. The cafe erupted into gentle applause, and Lila smiled, thanking them. But when she turned and saw Ethan standing at the door, her smile faltered. "You found me," she said softly, setting the violin down. "I never stopped looking," he replied. They sat together near the window as the last rays of sunset spilled across the ocean. Neither spoke for a moment, letting the sound of the waves fill the silence. "Why did you leave?" he finally asked. Lila looked down, tracing the edge of her violin case with her fingers. "Because it wasn't real, Ethan. That night, it was a game to you, a challenge in front of your rich friends. I wasn't going to let my music be a part of someone's joke." Ethan's jaw tightened. "You think it was a joke? Wasn't it?" she said quietly. "You said you'd marry me if I played. You didn't mean it. You just wanted to see if the poor waitress would humiliate herself for your entertainment." Her words stung, But she was right, at least partly. When I said it, maybe I didn't mean it, he admitted. But when you played, everything changed. I don't think I've ever felt anything that real before. Lila studied him for a long moment. His voice wasn't playful anymore. There was something raw, almost vulnerable in it. Why does it matter now? She asked. I played. The moment's gone. You have your world and I have mine. Ethan shook his head. You don't understand. Ever since that night I've been different. I thought I had everything, but your music showed me how empty it all was. You didn't just play a song, Lila. You woke something in me. She looked out the window, her eyes reflecting the ocean's fading light. Ethan, you can't build love on a single song. Then let me listen to more, he said quietly. She blinked, caught off guard. Let me hear you again, he continued. Play for me, not because I'm asking as a challenge, but because I need to understand the person behind that music. Lila hesitated. There was sincerity in his voice, but she wasn't sure she could trust it. Still, something in his eyes, that flicker of honesty, made her pick up the violin again. This time the song she played was softer, gentler. It wasn't about pain or loss. It was about healing. As she played, Ethan closed his eyes, feeling the melody wrap around him like a warm wave. When she stopped, he whispered, You don't play for people, do you? You play for yourself. Lila smiled faintly. That's the only way it means something. Ethan nodded slowly. Then maybe that's what I've been missing all my life. Something that means something. They began to meet often after that. Sometimes at the cafe, sometimes near the harbor where she practiced in the evenings. Ethan would sit quietly, just listening. He didn't talk about money, didn't try to impress her. He simply listened, and Lila began to see a different side of him. The arrogance faded, replaced by a quiet humility she never expected from a billionaire. He started learning to play the violin himself, clumsy at first, but determined. She laughed at his attempts, but the laughter was warm, genuine. Weeks turned into months. What started as curiosity slowly became connection. One night, as they sat by the pier watching the moonlight shimmer on the water, Ethan turned to her and said, You know, I meant what I said that night. She raised an eyebrow. About marrying me? He nodded. Yes, but not because of a challenge. Because you've shown me a version of myself I never knew existed. The man who doesn't want to own everything. Just one thing that's real. Lila's heart skipped. Ethan, she began, but he gently took her hand. I don't want your answer now, he said. I'll wait. Maybe forever if I have to. You once told me you play until a song feels complete. I'll wait until you play the one that says yes. Her eyes softened, and for the first time, she didn't pull away. Then I hope you have patience, Mr. Blake. My songs take time. He smiled. Good. Because for the first time in my life, I'm not in a hurry. That night, as she played beneath the moonlight, Ethan listened, not as a billionaire, not as a man trying to win a woman, but as someone who had finally learned to feel. The melody rose into the night sky, mingling with the ocean breeze. Somewhere between the notes and the silence that followed, a promise was made, not of wealth or fame, but of something far more precious. Love that was earned, not bought. And as her music drifted into the horizon, Ethan knew he didn't need to ask again. One day, when her song found its ending, her heart would answer, not with words, but with the sweetest melody of all.